Good evening. Oh, come on in. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Hope everybody's having a good day. Everybody's having a good day. As you guys come in the room, do me a favor. Please hit the share button. And of course, make sure you say hello. So this is night 3 of the Refresh and Rebuild series. And I'm Winfred Burns, the CEO of Global Drive Network. And tonight we're going to have a good night talking about refresh and rebuild your purpose. So I hope you guys are excited. I hope that you have your pen and paper ready to go because we got a lot to talk about, a lot to do tonight. So good evening, Della Major. How are you? Good evening, guys. Again, make sure you have your comments, so that way I can make sure that we answer them as best as possible. Again, tonight we're going to be talking about how to rebuild and refresh your purpose. And this is such an important thing, because anything we do, we need to make sure that it is in purpose, it is on purpose. And so when we are in a place or in a position where our purpose is being questioned, where our purpose is not being affirmed, or where our purpose is being attacked, or we've gone through some type of traumatic experience, such as divorce, some for assaults, abuse, bankruptcy, anything like that is, church hurt, loss of a job, loss of a child, so anything like that can put us in a position where we feel like our confidence, whether our purpose, is under attack. And so it's important that when we feel like that, we know what to do, that we don't allow what happened to us to be the sum total of who we are. And so, so that's what I'm excited to talk about tonight. And we're going to get into it. Again, make sure you hit the share button. If you have somebody who needs to hear this, who's been down, who's had just a rough year, who once was an outgoing person and now all of a sudden doesn't like to be around people, or and all that kind of stuff, like, this might be the night for them. So please make sure that you let them know that we are on. So again, Winfred Burns II, CEO of Global Drive Network. I'm also the money mentor. And so I coach and I train individuals and businesses how to reduce debt and how to create wealth. And so that's what I do as the money mentor. And we're going to use a lot of live examples. So I hope you guys are excited about that. And I'm going to go into it. So all of this will make sense. So I just need y'all to stay with me. Again, get your pens and papers. We got some notes. And I don't usually use the phrase life work, but I really liked Monday. I like it when Cicely used it. So if you hear me use that, know that I am plagiarizing from the fire starter when I do that, because there are going to be a couple of things that I'm going to want you guys to do. So let's start from the beginning. So what is confidence? So confidence is defined by the feeling or belief that one can rely on someone or something. It is a firm trust. Synonyms to the word are trust, belief, faith, credence, conviction, reliance. It is also defined as the state of feeling certain about the truth of something, or it is defined as a feeling of self-assurance arising from one's appreciation of one's own abilities. Again, other synonyms are self assurance, self confidence, self reliance, belief in oneself. So that's how we define confidence. I define it as believing in yourself. It's very simple. I think that confidence is most important. It's most important to believe in yourself when nobody else does. And so let me first also say that there is a difference between confidence and pride. So confidence is having a healthy assurance about who you are, about your skills, about your abilities, about your gifts, about knowing who you are. Arrogance exalts yourself or makes yourself bigger than everybody else. Confidence says, so whereas confidence says, I know I am good at ABC, pride says, I am nobody else. Pride says that I am. I don't need anybody else to do this. I don't need anybody else to be the best. I can do everything and everything, and it's all about the praise of me. So pride puffs you up, whereas confidence is just a sure, a confidence. Well, nobody's word can't use the word to define a word, but it's a belief that you are good at what you were assigned to do. And the reason you need confidence for purpose is because oftentimes, again, like I said, that we're going to go through traumatic experiences. We're going to have issues. We're going to have struggles. And it's in those moments that we define out how we really feel about ourselves. So the one thing in my experience, so here's the first story, or the first thing. So I've recently gone through had to go through a season where my own individual confidence was attacked. And so for me, it started or it happened this past year. For those who don't know, we attempted to do our very first conference, and which was the I almost say refresh retreat, which was the Level Up conference. So the Level Up conference was supposed to be on August 9th through 11th in Chicago, and we spent over a year planning this conference. I spent a nice amount of money for the conference, and at the end, and we met every week. We did we did a lot of stuff. I could say all we could do, but we did all we could do. I'll say that to get people to come to this conference. And at the end of the day, 3 people signed up, and it was in that moment that I felt really bad as a leader. I felt really bad as a man. I felt as though, again, this was an attack on my confidence. This was an attack on my, why is it that people wouldn't come? And, and then I'm seeing other conferences. And I'm like, so the issue is not the conference, and maybe it's me, and maybe people don't like me. Maybe I need to do something different. Maybe we just need to stop the whole thing. And all of this is what was playing in my head because of what happened. And so what I had to do was I had to take a step back to really find out how I thought. Excuse me. How I thought, how I was thinking, just again where I was in this process, because the one thing I understand is that, again, like I said, that confidence comes out really in moments of failure. There's a quote that's by one says, I can't remember who it is, but I have it in there. It says that rock bottom will teach you the lessons that the mountaintop never will. And the one thing that what confidence does, or what when you're trying to connect to purpose, is that You're going to have mountain experiences, you're going to have valley experiences, and both of them serve a purpose. But and we need them both in order to have a good understanding about what our purpose is. Because without mountains, just like without mountains, you'll never know how you really feel. Again, losing valleys, those are the places that will reveal your character. So don't ever, if you find yourself in a valley, if you find yourself in a low space, if you find yourself in a place that you're not sure, understand, if you're in a valley, it is simply just means that you are trying, that your character is being revealed. However, the flip side of that is that winning is a solution to helping bring confidence. So anytime I have gone into an organization, so one of the things that I've, you all know if you've been listening, that my background is in banking and finance, and so if you've heard me, you one of the things I used to do is I was the person who they would come into locations or branches that were underperforming. They would put me in this branch with the expectation that I would turn it around. So train the employees well, coach them up or coach them out was one of our phrases, and in a very short amount of time, get this organization back, this branch back up to a certain level of performance. And so I would do that. But the second thing I would always do, the first thing obviously would be talking to the staff and determining what I'm going to do with them. But the other thing I would always do is I would always set up scenarios where the staff could understand what it felt like to win. And so I would run little competitions. I would say, the person who opens the most checking accounts today, I'll buy them lunch. Or the person who gets the most loan applications, I'll let them leave an hour early on a Friday. Or just things like that. I will work, a shift for you if you do X, Y, Z. And the reason I did that is because I understood that a lot, in order to connect to confidence, which leads us into purpose, then I understood that we needed to taste what winning was like. Because winning, like confidence, like purpose, becomes not just about a feeling, but it becomes becomes to a discipline. So purpose, in and of itself, um, is simply just the the short version, the reason why we were born. And once we understand the reason why we were born, then we have to then understand how we are supposed to get to the destiny or the destination. So you hear the word destiny, but purpose leads us to destiny, to a destination or to a destiny. And so we learn who the person is. We learn who the person is we're supposed to be talking to. We learn in purpose how we're supposed to talk to them. Some of the stuff we talked about last night. We understand the methods, the way that they receive, the way that they don't, the way that they don't receive. We understand all of that when we get into understanding who we are in person. So so understand this again, that you gotta lose, because if you don't lose, it doesn't teach you character. Then the other part of this is in the process of that, you still have to understand that you got to find spaces and places where you can win, so you understand the habits and the disciplines that are necessary in order for you to win. Larry Bird says, so you have comments. Larry Bird has this quote. It says that a winner is someone who recognizes his or her God-given talents, works his or her tail off to develop them into skills, and uses these skills to accomplish his or her goal. Again, a winner is someone who recognizes his or her God-given talents, works his or her tail off to develop them into skills, and uses these skills to accomplish his or her goal. In essence, winning is a discipline. Winning is a discipline. You teach yourself how to win. So once you, again, assuming that we already have an understanding that we have a purpose, we have to then again step into a place where we have confidence, and like we learned on Monday, all of that plays into our identity, because now I'm able to get to a place where I say, I understand and say, I know who I am. I know what I was born to do, and now that I know what I was born to do, I can start moving in that direction. So rebuilding and refreshing purpose again is tied to establishing our identity. In business, identity helps us to define what we call our core competency. In relationships, identity helps us to establish our morals. It answers the question, both in business and in relationships, who am I? So if you understand that, it gets to that question, who am I? And so as you think about rebuilding and refreshing your identity, you want to ask the question, who am I? So it is similar to, if we're looking at the biblical narrative, there is a point in Genesis, I want to say Genesis 3, where Adam and Eve come to a place where they understand, where there is a crisis of identity. The crisis of identity happens when? It happens after they are disobedient and they eat the fruit. And once they eat the fruit, they go and they hide. And when they hide, God, who, according to the biblical narrative, walks through the cool of the garden of the day and says to him, Adam, where are you? And if you look at that statement is a question, not of, that's not really a question. God is not asking, is not asking the question because he doesn't know the answer. He's asking the question so Adam can answer the question for himself. And so when you get to the place, again, whether it's rock bottom, whether it's a place of where you're lacking confidence or don't have, or you're not sure about character, you have to start by asking yourself, who am I? And once you understand that, then we can move forward. 20 minutes in, I'm looking good. All right. So I'm about to give you an exact script of what you can do, or what you should do if you find yourself in a place where your identity is all over the place. You don't know who you are, where you're lacking confidence, where you really are not sure about your purpose. So there are 6 things that you have to do in order to rebuild and refresh your identity. Y'all ready? Here we go. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to commit to optimism. The first thing that you have to do is to commit to optimism. And though that might sound cheesy, it's really not. Commit to optimism. Optimism is defined as a hopefulness and confidence about the future or the successful outcome of something. It is, again, the hopefulness and confidence about the future or the successful outcome of something. You have to commit that no matter what, that you believe that everything will be okay. You have to believe, in the face of a rock bottom, in the face of a situation that you don't know what's going to happen, in the face of not having the answer, you have to train your mind, discipline yourself to be committed to optimism. Very simply, optimism is saying, I don't know the answer, but I know it's going to be all right. For me, optimism looked like, in the scenario of this conference, and Kels Q, the planning group, the team will tell you, there were a lot of times we would say, well, what are we going to do? Y'all, I don't know. I just know it's going to be okay. Or I would say, or something would happen, and I would just, I don't know. I just know all things work together for my good. I have no clue how it's going to happen. It's just understanding that something good has to happen. I can remember relationships that ended, and I can remember, um, I can remember when I had reached that moment at post divorce, and thinking what's going to happen, and having to learn like this is really. Instead of looking at the scenario and saying, so now I'm gonna tell you, I remember I was sitting in my car after my divorce was final, and I was crying. I was in tears, thinking that, um, oh my God, my life is over. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't know how I'm gonna do it. I don't know how I'm gonna make it. I don't know nothing. I just know I'm out here. God, what am I gonna do? And I am crying, and I'm like, God, why would you let this happen to me? Why would you? I'm doing the whole thing, and all I hear is, well, now you have an opportunity to do all this stuff you said you wanted to do. You said you wanted to start a business. You got a great time to do it. You said you wanted to do this. You wanted to go back to school. Now you have time to do it. You said you want to do this. And so for me, that situation turned into a moment of pain and anger to a moment of optimism. Because now, um, even though I didn't like what was happening, I was able to look at that scenario and say something good can still come from something bad. Now, optimism does not mean that you don't have a vulnerability. It's actually the exact opposite. When we put ourselves in a place where we are optimistic, what we are doing is we're opening ourselves up to being vulnerable and saying that I know that things are not going to happen right all the time. But I also know that even when things go wrong, we're still going to be able to figure out how we can make this right. Optimism says even though I don't have enough money to scale my business, I know that there is something inside of me that's going to come alive, that there's a strategy that's going to happen, that something is going to work out, and I'm going to be able to do this. It might not happen today, it might not happen till tomorrow or the next day, but because I am sure, because I have confidence that I am good enough, that this is the business, that this is the relationship, that this is the place I'm supposed to be, I know I am confident in my future. And so that's why we have to commit to optimism. The other thing that being optimistic does is it also allows us to experience um, the pleasure that comes with purpose. There's going to be pain, but there's also a lot of pleasure. And unless we're optimistic, what we do is we wall ourselves off, we close ourselves off to being able to even experience the pleasure of rebuilding and making your life, your business, your relationships how it's supposed to be looked. So that's the first thing. We've got to commit to optimism, because optimism is the door that opens us up to everything else. The second thing we have to do, we have to be optimists, but we also have to be honest. So one of the things that some people who are optimists do is they don't like to look at they want to live in the clouds, and that's great to live in the clouds, but you still got to have your feet planted on the ground. Because this is where the reality is. The reality is your financial situation is messed up. The reality is your relationship is messed up. The reality is your business is not where it's supposed to be. The reality is your purpose, you're feeling a little wavy. So if I'm going to rebuild purpose, I've got to be honest. I've got to be honest enough to say things like, I don't have the skills to do this. Or the reason that my relationship messed up was because of me. I was the toxic person. The reason why this is not happening in my life is because I don't listen to nobody. The reason this is happening is because I don't always go and get coaching, or I won't always handle this, or I won't always do this like I'm supposed. So the reason why this is happening is because of me. And when we put ourselves in a position where we can be honest with ourselves, where we can be honest about about what happened, then again, what we do is we clear out the debris. I took some medicine. Now you're supposed to be coughing like this. Excuse me. clear out all of this stuff so that way we can operate with a clear conscience and a clear mind about what's really going on. Because what happens when we're not honest, again, is we make stuff up. Y'all have seen it before. We make stuff up about what happened. We blame everybody else, and really the problem is us. So you got to be optimistic, but you got to be honest. The third thing you have to do in order to rebuild and refresh your purpose is we all need to, whatever area, in every area of our lives, is we need to perform a SWOT analysis. So for those who don't know what SWOT analysis is, it is an acronym for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So using, like I said, I'm gonna use Cicely's word. Your part of your life work is to do a SWOT analysis, and it's very simple. Take out a sheet of paper and just write in the margins S, several lines down W, several lines down O, several lines down T, and write what are your strengths, or if you're looking at yourself, if for your business, what is my business's strengths? What are the strengths of my business? What do I do really well? What do I do so well that with a little bit of training, I could be the best? What do I do so well that people will pay me for? What do I do so well that attracts people to me? And then list those out. Same thing with the weaknesses. What am I really bad at? What am I really bad at? And list them out. My things I'm really, personally, I've done this for myself several times. And yeah, I'm bad at a lot of stuff. But specifically when it comes to business, I know one of my weaknesses is I don't do detail very well. And so I'll get that later. Yeah, so I know I have to write that. I had to write that as a weakness. I don't do detail very well. I don't do this very well. I'm horrible at this. I'm terrible at this. And again, this goes back to being honest with yourself. Then the O is for opportunities. The O is for opportunities. Meaning, when I look across, if this is business, if I look across the market, where do I see that based upon my strengths or my company's position, I can take advantage of what's happening in the marketplace? So what do I do well? Or what are the weaknesses in the market that I can capitalize on? And it's even better if those can align with what you do well. And then T, what are my threats? Again, just what it says. What is a threat to me? Sometimes those threats are going to be overlapping with your weaknesses, but sometimes they're not. They don't have to. But what are the threats in the marketplace? What are threats in me? Yeah. So to answer to queuing to your comment, so I did one of these when it came to the conference, and actually I did one of these because if you all know, I'm a part of a group. It's three of us, myself, and you guys know Andre Dowdy. And so after I called him, maybe texted him, I can't remember, about having to cancel the conference. He asked me, he made me do a SWOT analysis. He did. He asked me, okay, what did you learn? And so when he said that, my mind went like, let's do a SWOT analysis. And so I did it. And so we walked away with several things that I learned based upon planning this conference. The first thing that I learned was before you ever announce a conference, you already want to have major sponsors prepared to sponsor you. That was number one, because trying to do that within that year or that time frame is very difficult, because if anybody who's ever tried to get sponsors from major companies, it's a process. I never knew. It was my first conference. That takes a while. The second thing I learned was that at least 12 months before I needed to increase my engagement both on and offline, um, meaning that you need a large following. So in marketing, we have certain targets that we look at. One of the targets that we have, for example, is when we run a campaign, we want to see what's the clicks. How many people clicked on your ad? How many people open your ad? We look at stuff like that. But when it comes to attending a conference, you have pretty much the same thing. So there's a certain number. So if you expect 100 people to come to your conference, there's a certain number of engagement or following that you should have before you start to do that. And so I understood that then. I understood that afterwards. That it takes time, just like in a business, it takes time, like 6 or 7 times of somebody seeing you, that they actually begin to want to buy from you. And so I needed to ramp that time up faster, so that people would have the opportunity to get to know me, get to know our team, our speakers better. And so what that turned into, again, was the way we do the show. If you guys have noticed, we have and are making some changes to the show. So there is a reason, for example, that we're doing this. This is a direct result of what happened at the conference. I knew that we still needed to engage the community in a formal setting, but I also understood that there were people who didn't know us that needed to have access to us. And since before this, if you hasn't been following us for a while, if you notice, probably 90%, I'd say 80% of our shows were all about relationships. Since the conference, almost all of our shows have been about business. And that was a strategic shift because, again, when we've been doing this for several years now, so we have built up a following or a knowledge base for being people who are good at discussing relationships, but not about business. And so what winds up happening is when I start putting out stuff saying that we're going to do a conference about business, people looking like, but y'all talk about relationships. And so what I had not properly done was introduced us to the community as people who do who talk about relationships and who have an expertise in business. And so that was my mistake, one of my mistakes in that process. So doing that for a longer period of time, giving what we would call, again, establishing who our core competencies are, who we are, so people, would see us. And not just on having an online presence. Online is great, but doing things in front of people, with people, so that they would get a chance to meet us. Because whether we know it or not, we buy personalities. The third thing I learned was my people love to be entertained. And so to have a conference is great, but we want to know where the fun is at. And so one of the things that I learned, and actually, interesting enough, Kels actually suggested we do this when we were planning for it, was we talk more about the entertainment. In my mind, it's like, yeah, we'll talk about it, but the real meat of the conference is the teaching, which is true, but we like to be entertained. So a lesson for me was to learn how to do that, how to do better, how to do more of that. So other thing I learned was have a better understanding of our target market. And then the fifth thing was ramp up visibility at least a year ahead of time, which is pretty similar to the increased engagement. So that was my SWOT analysis that I did just for the conference. So from that SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, I then have to come up with a plan. So you then come up with plans. So now we're still talking about this is how you rebuild and refresh your purpose. You have to come up with a plan. So your plan is, in the plan you have to come up with short-term goals and an action plan, medium-term goals and action plans, long-term goals and action plans. So here's an example. A short-term goal for us, is to go from, I think I said 30%, a 30% growth in engagement in the radio show year over year. And so our shows, and how do we do that? So then I had to put a plan in place for that. Another short-term goal was, and if you've been watching the show, this might now make sense, was to get more engagement. So when you all hear us every show saying things like, we want your comments, we want your feedback, we want your comments, we want your feedback, that is directly tied to the fact that we want to know who our target market is and what they need and what they want better. So that's a goal. So our goal, the specific goal would be to say, and so when you do goals, you want to do what's called a SMART goal. SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time sensitive. So meaning for a short-term SMART goal, it could be 30% growth. That's specific and measurable by on each of the Scoop radio shows by January 2020. So specific, measurable, is that attainable? Yes. Is it relevant to what we're trying to do? Yes. Is it time sensitive? Yes. Okay. And so once you do that, do the same thing for medium-term goals, long-term goals. And then ask yourself, again, is this plan going to get me to that? Because if the plan doesn't get you to the long-term goal, it shouldn't be a plan. Okay. So once you do that, and maybe before, some would say before, I think another thing that we should do as we are rebuilding and refreshing our purpose is we have to define who we were, define who we are, and define who we will be. So define who you were, define who you are, and define who you will be. So you want to ask yourself questions like, how am I, or how is my business, if you're doing this around your businesses, currently perceived? How am I currently being perceived? Because if I think I am being perceived as, and this is a conversation I actually had. So I had a conversation with somebody where I asked them, like, so when you see me do business, what do you see? And the answer was not lovely. The answer I got was, well, Winfred, you confused me, because 1 minute you're a pastor, 1 minute you're talking about money, 1 minute you're talking about relationships, and so I am confused. And I thought that was a very great statement. And so the follow-up to that was, you have to decide who you want to be. My question and my response was, why can't I be all of that? Why can't I be a pastor who talks about money and who talks about relationships? But the person's point was, this is how people are currently perceiving you. That if you are talking about all of this stuff and you're throwing it at us, we don't know who you really are. And because of the way you do it, this is the second part of the conversation, you are not the most vulnerable in terms of your emotions, your story. And so we don't get an opportunity to really get to understand the passion behind your purpose. And I was like, wow. Again, didn't feel good, but that was an honest assessment. And so again, I had to ask the question. So that was me asking the question, how am I, or how is my business being perceived? And is that my goal? So if my goal was to be a pastor who talks about business and relationships, then I'm on point. But if that's not my goal, then I have to make some adjustments. It also asks you also have to ask yourself the question, how, so that again leads you to, how do I desire my business or myself to be perceived? So again, if how I'm being perceived now, or how I was being perceived and how I now am being perceived, are not accurate, then I need to make some changes. We call it reinventing yourself. You hear that a lot. You have to reinvent yourself. You have to reinvent yourself. And really all that is saying is you have to ask yourself again, how do I and how is my business being perceived in in the world or by the people who see me? And then again, how do I want to be perceived in the future? So again, do I want to be the pastor who talks about relationships and who talks about money? Is that how in the future I want to be perceived? Or do I want to be perceived as the CEO of Global Drive Network who has, whatever. And again, now do y'all see where this plan comes in? So all of that ties into, again, you got to have a plan. I'm going to stop for a second. Does anybody have any questions? Are there any questions? Actually, I'm pretty much done. Okay, no question. All right. So then the last one, then again, as we just saw, the last thing is to execute. Very simple. You have to execute. So after you put these plans into place, these short, medium, and long-term plans into place, you've got to execute. And to execute, you've got to ask yourself the question, first of all, what tools and what training do I need? After you've done this SWOT analysis, after you now know how you were perceived, are perceived, and will be perceived or want to be perceived in the future, you've got to say, do I have the tools? Do I have the team? Do I have the training to do what I need to do? And if the answer is no, make that a part of your plan. The cool part about purpose is that purpose, like I said, is driven by we don't drive the purpose, but we do drive. We don't know. What I want to say. We don't pick the person, but we drive it. So in the pursuit of the destiny or the destination, our purpose, our passion about what we are, the destination that we're trying to get to, is this helps us. So purpose again says, what am I trying to be in this person's life? I hope that makes sense. What am I trying to be? Am I trying to be somebody else? And I tell the story all the time. I remember the day I found out I believed I was called to pastor. How do you know what your purpose is? Can I say that again? How do you know what your purpose is? I lost the question. What was that question again? How do I know what your purpose is if you have many talents or many definitions of you? Good question. How do you know what your purpose is if you have many talents or many definitions of you? I call that the curse of the gifted is what I call that. That's called the curse of the gifted. The curse of the gifted is where you are a pastor who loves to preach and teach, who also loves to talk about and help people relationship, who also likes to talk about money and finance, who also has 3 businesses, all that kind of stuff. So that's yes. How do you know what your purpose is? So here's the cool part, and I should have said this earlier. Purpose has absolutely nothing to do with your purpose can be given in multiple ways. So it's not about the talents. It's not about your talents are a part of how you release purpose, but your talents are not purpose. Here's a good example. So, and this is going to the story I was just about to tell. So I remember the day when I knew I was called to pastor. I went to my pastor, Apostle H. Daniel Wilson, and this was before I went after my first semester of college. I came to him and said, "Sir, I know I'm called to pastor." And the very first question he asked me, the first 2 questions he asked me, is he said, "Who are you called to pastor, and what are you called to say?" He said, "Who are you called to pastor, and what are you called to say to them?" So your purpose is not about what I thought my purpose was to pastor. The truth is the purpose was what was I supposed to say to the people who I'm supposed to pastor. So having many talents and having many definitions of who you are, first of all, having many talents just gives you more ways to say what you're supposed to say to the people who you are supposed to say it to. The definitions of you, again, all of us have different definitions of us based upon where people meet us, but ultimately the many different definitions, if you put them all together, usually have one thing that they surround. And a job is not a purpose. Yeah. Meaning, can purpose become your passion, which will help define a specific goal? I'm gonna get okay. So meaning, um, purpose is not being a pastor is not my purpose. So, so if they, and I actually learned this after divorce. So what you learn is that if they take away and somebody says I can never pastor a church, or they never let me pastor a church again for whatever reason, um, how do I accomplish what I was born to do? There's another way to do it, and for me, it was you start your own radio show. So there was a season after my divorce that people would not invite me to their church. Like all of that was gone. Some of them still won't, which is fine. But I had to say I can't stop being what God called me to be because y'all mad because I'm divorced. And so it was okay. How do I release what I've been given? And so that meant start a radio show. And so I get to preach on the radio, or write a book. So to answer that question, how it kills is how do you know what your purpose is if you have many talents? Is you find out what they all have in common, and you let that guide the action, but all of the actions still have that same thing in common. So, since Kale's asked the question, if Curvy Kitten is a movement to help women understand that they are beautiful, that taking care of their bodies is the way to go, then what that in turn does is you know that whether it's through the clothing line, whether it's through your writing, whether it's through whatever other talents you have, you're basically going to be saying the same thing. That's how you do it. About passion. So the passion question is, can they turn into a passion so that way, so your passion pursues your purpose. So purpose. So here's the place where you find purpose. Purpose is found at the intersection of passion and talent. So the things that you are talented at and the things that you are passionate about somewhere overlap. So somewhere what you're really good at and what you're passionate about meet somewhere. So um, I'm passionate about teaching people how to live a life of freedom. That's what I'm passionate about. That's my passion. What I'm good at is I'm good at talking. So what things can I talk to people and and where I can teach people how to be that life is okay to be, that you want to be free. So those two, that intersection is where your passion is where there. So that's where passion comes in, because ultimately, again, passion is great, but the problem with passion is just like, um, just like motivation, it disappears at times, and so that's why discipline is more important than motivation. So you want to be passionate about it, and there are going to be times, especially in those rock bottom moments, where you're not going to have a passion about it. So find that, and then you can always, reinvigorate passion. So, um, the other thing you want to do, ask yourself, besides what tools and trainings you need, is you want to, when you set up these plans, you want to have what I call status checks. So you want to say, like I said in the plan, in the SMART plan, put a time frame on it. So if by January 2020, if my goal was to say by January 2020 we would be at 30% increase, then somewhere around October, the end of October, I need to be looking to say, how am I progressing? Because if I'm not progressing well, then I need to throw it out and do something different. Or am I ahead of schedule? So I need to check up days. So 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and do that. So again, I'm going to say it again. Rebuilding and refreshing purpose is possible. It is actually, so I actually think that when we look, and this comes my optimist self, that when we get to a place where we are at a crisis of purpose, that we are also at a place where I believe that life, that God is trying to tell us either that we're going in the wrong direction, or that the house that we built was not built strong enough, and we've got to figure out how to build it stronger. Because all of us were born with a purpose. All of us were born with a destination in mind. All of us were born to make this, our surroundings, our world, better in some way. And so when we avail ourselves, when we open ourselves up to being the type of person who is available to do that, then what we say is that I'm going to align myself with myself. I'm going to align myself with the thing that I was born to do. I'm going to allow myself and allow God to do what he is going to do, the universe, whatever you call it, to do what it's going to do to bring me to that place. I'm going to do my part, and it's going to happen. But ultimately, we don't have to sit in ruin. We don't have to sit looking at the broken pieces of our lives and thinking that that's it. Because the reality is, even if things don't go right, you can do them again, and you can do them better. Just like, even though the conference didn't go well, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it better, and it's going to be fine. And even if it don't work out the second time, guess what's going to happen? I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it better unless God tell me don't do no more conferences. But I'm not going to quit. And that's what you can't do either. So, any other questions? Every last one of us. Everybody's born with the purpose. Everybody's born with the destination. All right. Well, once again, I got right on time. Once again, I appreciate everybody for tuning in tonight. Tomorrow is day 4, and Kels is up tomorrow. She's going to be talking about fashion. So yeah, there's some trends out there that um, that she's going to give us. Whatever y'all do, don't wear that, fellas. Don't wear that for real thing. But I digress. But she's going to get our fashion together and show us how to look good. So I'm excited about that. Y'all come back for day 4 of that. Of course, again, every Tuesday, the Scoop radio show is on. So you guys make sure that you tune in for that. Also, if you did not hit share on this, hit share. These videos, we didn't say this earlier, will be up until Friday. So Friday, all of the videos from this week will be taken down, and what will happen is they will be transferred to our YouTube page. So if you don't follow us on YouTube, The Scoop Radio Show, you should go and subscribe today. Also follow us on social media. So Instagram at The Scoop Radio Show, then on Facebook, Scoop Radio Show. We don't have Snapchat, so yeah. Twitter, no, we don't have Twitter either. So follow us. Hit the share button, follow us, let people know. If you have questions that you couldn't ask and you wanted to ask me later, that's fine. DM me, inbox me. If you're not on my email list, The Money Mentor, my email list is no. I actually make it easy on you. Go to my public figure page, Winfred Burns II, click on the sign up button and fill that out, and that will put you into my email list, where you will get my Money Mentor workbook and some other stuff, I think, too. You get that for free. Yeah, I think that's it. Other than that, y'all have a good night. I appreciate y'all for hanging out with me tonight. Again, refresh your purpose, rebuild your purpose, because you have a purpose. And guess what? That purpose is for you to do something great. There you go. The Dalai Lama says, with realization of one's own potential and self-confidence, in one's ability, one can build a better world. And that's what you do. So y'all have a good night. I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. And go be people of purpose. Good night.